My name is Melissa, and I'm 27 years old. I went in for a routine surgery, but what happened next still haunts me to this day. I remember lying on the operating table and feeling drowsy as the anesthesia kicked in. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in the middle of the surgery. I tried to move, but I couldn't. I tried to speak, but my voice wouldn't come out. I was paralyzed and trapped, lying there on the operating table while the surgeons continued their work. Panic set in as I realized what was happening. I was awake and conscious, but unable to move or make a sound. I felt every cut, every stitch, and every instrument they used. The pain was unbearable, but I couldn't even scream. I was completely at the mercy of the surgeons, and there was nothing I could do about it. Time seemed to drag on forever, but eventually, the surgery was over. The surgeons left the room, and I was left alone. I could hear the sound of the machines beeping, but no one came to check on me. I was still paralyzed and unable to move. I started to feel like I was losing my mind, trapped in this nightmare with no end in sight. Days passed, and I was still trapped in that operating room. The hospital staff was unaware that I was awake and conscious, and no one came to check on me. I was dehydrated, hungry, and in constant pain. I thought I was going to die in that room, alone and forgotten. Just when I had given up all hope, a nurse finally stumbled upon me. She was shocked to see that I was awake and called for help. The surgeons were called back, and they were able to reverse the anesthesia. I was finally able to move and speak again. The hospital staff was horrified by what had happened and did everything they could to make it right. But the trauma of those days will stay with me forever. I still have nightmares about being trapped in that operating room, and I can never fully shake the fear and terror I felt while I was there. I woke up in a dark, cold room. The only sound I could hear was the sound of my own breathing and the distant beeping of a machine. I tried to sit up in the bed, but my head was pounding and my body felt weak. I closed my eyes and tried to remember how I got here. It all came back to me in a flash. I was in the hospital, recovering from a long illness. I was finally starting to feel better when the power suddenly went out. The lights went out, and the machines around me fell silent. I was plunged into darkness. At first, I tried to remain calm. I told myself that this was just a temporary power outage, and that the lights would come back on any moment. But as the minutes ticked by, I began to feel a sense of unease creeping over me. The room was completely silent, and I was completely alone. And then, I heard the noises. They were faint at first, but they gradually grew louder, more intense. They sounded like footsteps, shuffling and scraping against the floor, as if someone was walking slowly down the hallway towards my room. I felt my heart rate quicken, and I realized with a start that I was scared. I tried to call for help, but my voice was barely a whisper. My mouth was dry, and my heart was pounding in my chest. I tried to get out of the bed, but my legs were weak, and I stumbled and fell to the floor. The noises outside the room grew louder, closer. And then, suddenly, they stopped. There was a long silence, and I could hear the sound of someone breathing heavily, just outside the door. I felt a sense of dread wash over me, and I crawled backwards, trying to put as much distance as I could between myself and the door. And then, the door slowly creaked open, and a figure stepped into the room. I couldn't see who it was, but I could feel their presence, and I knew that I was no longer alone. I screamed, but my voice was lost in the darkness. I felt a cold hand grab me, and I was pulled out of the room, into the darkness. I don't know what happened after that. I don't remember anything else. The next thing I knew, I was back in my hospital bed, surrounded by the familiar beeping of the machines. The lights were back on, and I was safe. But the memory of what happened in that dark, isolated room stayed with me, haunting me for years to come. I still can't shake the feeling that something sinister was in that room with me. That I was not alone. That I was being watched. That I was being hunted. And I'm scared, because I don't know what will happen if I'm ever left alone in the dark again. I've always been a curious person. That's why I couldn't resist the urge to explore the abandoned parts of the hospital. I had heard whispers about strange things happening in the dark, empty halls, but I didn't believe the rumors. I thought it was just the overactive imaginations of the other patients. So, one day, I decided to take a walk through the abandoned ward. At first, it was just like any other part of the hospital. Dark and quiet, but not scary. But then, I heard something that made me stop in my tracks. It was a soft shuffling, like someone or something was walking through the hall. I hesitated, wondering if I should turn back. But my curiosity was stronger than my fear, and I continued down the hall, following the sound. It led me to a door, partially open, and I couldn't resist the urge to peek inside. The room was empty, but it was different from the other rooms I had seen. The walls were covered in strange symbols, and there was a feeling of unease in the air. I was about to turn and leave when I heard a voice. It was low and guttural, like nothing I had ever heard before. I spun around, but there was no one there. I started to back away, my heart pounding in my chest, but the voice spoke again, this time louder and more insistent. I realized then that the voice was coming from the wall. I reached out, my hand shaking, and touched the symbols. And then, the wall started to move. It was like it was alive, shifting and pulsing, and I felt a sense of dread wash over me. I screamed and ran, but the voice followed me. It was calling my name, and I could feel its presence growing closer. I was terrified, but I didn't stop. I ran until I reached my room, and I locked the door behind me. But even now, as I sit here in the safety of my bed, I can still hear the voice. It's calling to me, tempting me to go back to the abandoned ward. And I know that I'll never be able to resist the urge to explore the unknown again. Because the abandoned ward has a hold on me, and I'll never be able to escape the horrors that I discovered there.